The multiverse is a tapestry of infinite realities, each thread woven with its own immutable laws, its own definitions of power, its own understanding of what it means to die. Some universes are built on hope, some on sacrifice, some on the quiet heroism of ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. And then there are universes built on something older, something raw. The understanding that power is the only language that matters, and that every conflict, every war, every act of cosmic domination ultimately comes down to two combatants standing across from each other with nothing between them but will and blood, and the absolute refusal to fall. The Mortal Kombat universe was that kind of place. And it had never, in 10,000 years of tournament history, encountered anything remotely like Wade Wilson. It started, as so many of Wade's catastrophes did, with food. The chimichanga in question had come from a street vendor in Guadalajara, whose cart bore 3 separate biohazard stickers, a hand-painted warning in 4 languages, and a small laminated card that read, in English, "Not responsible for dimensional instability." Wade had taken this as a recommendation. The vendor, a small man with nervous eyes and fingers that seemed to exist in slightly more dimensions than his body, had tried to wave him off, had pointed at the card, had actually grabbed Wade's arm with surprising strength and said, in very clear English, "Senor, that one has been marinated in something that should not exist." Wade had tipped him $20 and eaten it in 4 bites. The flavor had been extraordinary, somewhere between carnitas and the concept of eternity. There had been a warmth that started in his stomach and expanded outward through dimensions he didn't have names for, and a sensation like being turned inside out and then right side in again, but in a slightly different universe than the one he'd started in. His healing factor had fired like a car alarm, every cell screaming in confused biological protest. The street of Guadalajara had stretched, pixelated slightly. He'd thought, that's new. And then collapsed inward like a closing eye. He fell through somewhere that tasted like lightning and old blood, and the specific kind of magic that had never once, as in its entire existence, developed a sense of humor. He landed on stone. Specifically, he landed on a stone courtyard, on an island that smelled of salt water, ancient sorcery, and approximately 47 flavors of impending doom. The sky above was wrong, too orange, threaded with green at the horizon in a way that suggested the atmosphere had made some questionable life choices. Torches burned in iron sconces along walls carved with glyphs that pulsed with dim, malevolent light. The architecture was a collision of Asian temple aesthetics and something older, something that predated any civilization Wade could name. Stone worked with inhuman precision into shapes that suggested the builders had fundamentally different opinions about what geometry was supposed to do. There were people staring at him. A lot of people. A man in yellow and black with a face mask and crossed arms who radiated the specific energy of someone who had not smiled in several decades. A woman in white who held herself like a weapon. A large man who was approximately 60% muscle and 40% suppressed violence. Dressed in the kind of red and black outfit that said, "I have killed people on every continent." A monk in white whose calm was so absolute it had become its own form of aggression. And at the center of the courtyard, elevated on a dais of black stone, a figure in green robes whose face was a landscape of absolute, terrible age. Skin pulled tight over a skull that had absorbed centuries of dark practice, eyes like 2 black coins that had been spending time in places light didn't reach. Wade looked at the robed figure. The robed figure looked at Wade. Wade looked down at himself. Red and black suit, twin katanas, 4 guns, 2 chimichangas in a belt pouch because he'd learned to always carry backup. and then looked back up. "Cool island," he said. "Very Survivor Season 1 energy. Are you Jeff Probst? You've really let yourself go." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. The green-robed figure and Wade's brain, which had been to stranger places than most and had the psychological scarring to prove it, was already assembling context, cross-referencing the island, the architecture, the fighters, the specific flavor of soul-hungry dark magic radiating off the old man like a cologne. Tilted his head with the slow and deliberate movement of something that had not been surprised in a very long time and was recalibrating. "You are not from this realm," said Shang Tsung. "Buddy," Wade said, pulling himself to his feet and dusting stone dust off his knees. "I am barely from my realm. Where am I? What is this place? And..." He paused, his fourth wall awareness flickering like a tuning fork struck against reality's edge. Reading the specific resonance of the universe around him, the feel of it, and the genre of it. Oh, this is fantastic. He turned in a slow circle, taking in the courtyard, the fighters, the wrong-colored sky, the ancient malevolent architecture, the absolute ocean of brutal spiritual energy radiating from every surface. Mortal Kombat, he breathed, with the reverence of a man who had spent formative years in front of a television screen pressing buttons in specific sequences. "I'm in Mortal Kombat. I am actually in Mortal Kombat." He grabbed his own face with both hands. "This is the best Tuesday I've ever had. It's Tuesday, right? Doesn't matter. This is incredible. You..." He pointed at the man in yellow and black. "You're Scorpion. That's Scorpion. You're real. You're standing right there. I had your poster." "I didn't have your poster, that's not true. But I absolutely would have, if I'd known you were a real person and not a video game character, which, okay, technically, from your perspective, I'm the fictional one, which is a layer of meta I am not emotionally prepared to unpack right now." Shang Tsung descended 2 steps from his dais. The air around him thickened with sorcerous intent, souls whispering at the edges of his presence like restless water. "You have arrived at the tournament of Mortal Kombat," he said, each word placed with the care of a man who understood that language was a form of trap. "Your presence here is either destiny or accident. In my experience, there is no meaningful difference." His eyes tracked Wade with the specific attention of a collector who has found something unexpected in a lot he thought he knew. "The question is not how you arrived. The question is what you are." Wade drew both katanas in a single fluid motion, held them out to either side, tilted his head at Shang Tsung, and grinned behind his mask. "I'm the guy," he said cheerfully, "who's about to absolutely ruin your tournament. If you want to see more crossover battles and unexpected universe collisions, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and universe you'd want to see in the comments below. Let's explore the infinite together." The torches guttered. Somewhere on the island, a gong sounded. Deep, resonant, the specific tone of something ancient being set into motion. The fighters in the courtyard shifted their stances. Shang Tsung smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had consumed 10,000 souls and found every single one of them ultimately manageable. He had never met anyone who thought being in Mortal Kombat was good news. That, he would come to understand, was his first mistake. Shang Tsung had lived for centuries. He had watched empires rise from ambition and collapse into ash. He had consumed the souls of warriors, sorcerers, kings, and gods, had felt their entire existences compress into the space behind his sternum, every memory and power and desperate final thought becoming his to catalog and use. He had orchestrated 10 Mortal Kombat tournaments with the patience of a man who understood that the longest game was always the one worth playing. He had encountered champions from a dozen realms, each one convinced of their own uniqueness, each one ultimately reducible to the same fundamental equation: flesh, soul, and the finite capacity to endure. In all of that time, across all of those centuries, he had never once had to revise his fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence. Wade Wilson was already making him nervous. "So, here's what I'm thinking," Wade said. "Our sheathing one katana and producing a small notebook from somewhere that Shang Tsung's spatial awareness insisted did not contain a pocket." He flipped it open. It appeared to contain a hand-drawn bracket. "Tournament format, right? Single elimination, winner defends Earthrealm. 10 consecutive victories means Outworld gets to invade. Elder gods referee from a comfortable distance so they can claim they're not responsible when everything goes wrong. That's the structure. I've done my research. I've also done extensive button mapping research, which is arguably more relevant, but let's stay focused." He tapped the notebook with one finger. "The question is, where do I fall in this bracket? Because I have strong opinions about seeding." The courtyard had not relaxed. If anything, it had done the opposite. Every fighter present had quietly repositioned, the specific unconscious choreography of trained killers triangulating angles of attack. Sonya Blade stood near the western archway with her arms crossed and the expression of a special forces officer who had encountered a new variable and was already running threat assessments. Johnny Cage, who had arrived on the island with the energy of a man who thought this was a career opportunity and was rapidly revising that assessment, stood near the eastern wall with his sunglasses slightly askew and his mouth open in a way that suggested he recognized a fellow Chaos agent and wasn't sure whether to be relieved or concerned. Liu Kang stood closest to Shang Tsung's dais. Balanced and still, his eyes tracking Wade with the focused attention of a Shaolin monk who had learned that the most dangerous opponents were the ones you couldn't read. Shang Tsung descended the final steps from his dais and moved across the courtyard with the unhurried grace of a predator who had never needed to hurry. He stopped 6 feet from Wade and studied him the way he studied every soul he intended to eventually consume, cataloging, measuring, identifying the specific texture of what made this being rather than any other. What he found was unusual. The man's soul was present, vivid actually, almost aggressively vivid, it burning with a chaotic luminescence that Shang Tsung associated with beings of significant power. But it was strange, layered in ways that made no immediate sense. There were wounds in it, deep, old wounds that had scarred over with something that wasn't quite healing. More like the soul had grown around the damage the way a tree grows around an embedded nail. There was grief in it, and rage, and a humor so thoroughly weaponized it had become structural, load-bearing, the thing holding the entire architecture together. And beneath all of that, threaded through every layer like a current that didn't know it was remarkable, was something Shang Tsung had no name for. An awareness that extended beyond the soul itself. A consciousness that seemed to perceive its own existence from a vantage point slightly outside of it. He had consumed the souls of seers and prophets. He had absorbed beings capable of perceiving futures and alternate timelines. He had never encountered a soul that seemed to be aware of him looking at it. Wade pointed at him. "You're doing the soul red thing. I can feel it. It's like being looked at by a very old, very hungry librarian. It's not comfortable, but I respect the commitment." "Your soul," Shang Tsung said carefully, "is unlike anything I have encountered. I get that a lot. It's the healing factor. Very confusing for mystical entities. The soul technically dies every time the body does, which for me is pretty regularly. and then it has to reconstitute, which I'm told is absolutely horrible to witness from the astral plane. My therapist, I don't have a therapist, would say it's given me a complicated relationship with mortality. He paused. Also, I can hear the narrative. That's probably part of it. It adds a layer. The narrative, Shang Tsung repeated. The story. The thing being told right now. You know what? This is going to be a whole thing to explain, and we don't have time because you're about to make me a proposition. Shang Tsung was quiet for precisely the length of time it took him to determine that the most efficient path forward was to proceed as if this was manageable. You have arrived at a tournament that governs the fate of your realm. Earthrealm, yeah. You possess combat abilities that are a pause, and the specific pause of a man editing his language in real time. Notable. I prefer catastrophic but notable works. I am prepared to offer you formal entry into the tournament. As a combatant, you would fight under the banner of Earthrealm. Your victories would count toward the total required to prevent Outworld's invasion. He let that settle for a moment before adding, with the smoothness of centuries of practice, of course, a warrior of your evident capability might find the standard arrangement limiting. There are other options for those with the wisdom to recognize opportunity. Wade snapped the notebook shut. There it is, the villain offer, right on schedule. He looked at Liu Kang. He does this to everyone, right? It's not just me. He looked back at Shang Tsung. Okay, here's the thing. I'm genuinely, deeply excited to be here. This is a dream scenario for me. Fighting the best fighters from multiple realms, on soul sorcery, interdimensional stakes, outfits that should not work but absolutely do. He gestured at Scorpion's yellow and black with genuine admiration. I'm in. I am so completely in for this tournament. But I'm going to need some ground rules established. Ground rules? Shang Tsung said. Number 1. Wade held up a finger. I fight for Earthrealm. Not because Raiden asked me to. I haven't met Raiden yet, but I already have thoughts. But because the alternative involves a guy named Shao Kahn conquering everything, and I have a pathological problem with authoritarianism that my definitely non-existent therapist says stems from personal history we won't get into. Number 2. Second finger. If I die during a fight, I come back. That's not cheating. That's just biology. Anybody who has a problem with that can take it up with my genetic structure. Number 3. Third finger. I reserve the right to comment on everything. The fights, the architecture, the fashion, the moral framework of the tournament itself. This is non-negotiable. It is a condition of my psychological survival. He lowered his hand and looked at Shang Tsung with an expression that was cheerful in the specific way that things are cheerful when there is something very serious underneath. Are we doing this? Shang Tsung studied him for a long moment. The souls within him stirred, restless. Something in their collective consciousness recognizing a frequency they had never encountered. A being for whom death had been made meaningless, standing in a universe whose entire power structure was built on death's absolute finality. Welcome, said Shang Tsung, to Mortal Kombat. Oh, this is going to be so good, Wade said. And from somewhere across the courtyard, Scorpion made a sound that was not quite a growl and not quite a warning, a sound that said, I am already regretting this tournament. He wasn't wrong. The first fight was supposed to be a demonstration. Shang Tsung had arranged it with the clinical efficiency of a man who understood that new variables needed to be tested before they could be properly exploited. A demonstration bout Not a tournament match, not yet. Just a calibration exercise to measure what this strange arrival from a realm no one had mapped could actually do when the talking stopped and the violence started. He had selected the opponent with care. Scorpion had not been asked. He had volunteered. This was, in retrospect, information. The courtyard cleared in the specific way that space is clear when everyone present understands that what is about to happen will be either instructive or catastrophic, and either way, worth watching from a safe distance. Liu Kang stood near the archway, with his arms folded, an expression neutral in the way that Shaolin neutrality is never actually neutral. It was the focused attention of a man cataloging everything, filing it, preparing for whatever came next. Sonya Blade had positioned herself at an elevated vantage point on the wall, one hand resting near a weapon she hadn't drawn. Her special forces instincts running probability calculations that kept returning results she didn't fully trust. When Johnny Cage had found a piece of wall to lean against and was watching with the expression of a man who had paid for front row seats to something he wasn't sure he should be enjoying. Scorpion stood at the center of the courtyard and burned. Not metaphorically. The specter of the Netherrealm generated heat the way certain philosophical positions generate discomfort. Constantly, without apparent effort, as a simple function of what he was. The air around him shimmered. The stone beneath his feet was warm. His eyes, when they fixed on Wade Wilson across 15 feet of ancient tournament ground, held the specific quality of fire that has decided it will not stop until there is nothing left to consume. Scorpion had died, had been murdered, along with his clan and his family, by forces that had conspired to use his grief as a weapon. Had existed in the Netherrealm's specific torment, had been resurrected as something that was no longer quite human, and had made its peace with that by becoming exceptionally good at ensuring other things stopped being human too. He had never lost a fight by giving up. He had never encountered anyone who treated his existence as a delightful novelty. "Okay, so I have to tell you," Wade said, settling into a fighting stance that was technically correct, but delivered with an energy that suggested he was enjoying himself in a way that combat was generally not supposed to produce. "I've thought about this fight specifically a lot. Like a genuinely embarrassing amount of hours of my life. You're Scorpion. You're the guy. You're the most iconic character in the whole franchise, which is saying something in a franchise that contains a four-armed prince and a guy who throws his hat and a man whose primary power is being extremely gray." He drew both katanas. They caught the torchlight and held it. "I want you to know that whatever happens here, I have tremendous respect for you and your whole." He gestured at the general hellfire and vengeance aesthetic. "Situation." Scorpion said nothing. Scorpion did not do warm-up conversation. Like the spear came without preamble. The kunai on its chain, screaming through the air with the velocity of something propelled by Netherrealm force rather than simple muscle. Covering 15 feet in a fraction of a second, trailing fire, aimed at the center of Wade's chest. Wade's healing factor would later categorize what happened next as deeply unpleasant. The kunai punched through his sternum, through his spine, and out through his back. The chain snapped taut. Scorpion pulled. Wade flew across the courtyard. He hit the stone wall with a sound like a car accident, slid down it, and landed in a heap that was anatomically incorrect in several respects. There was a moment of absolute stillness. Sonya Blade's hand had moved to her weapon without her consciously deciding to move it. Liu Kang had taken one step forward, then stopped. Johnny Cage had straightened up from the wall. Shang Tsung watched with the careful attention of a scientist, observing an experiment reach its critical point. Wade's hand moved, then his arm, then with the grinding biological determination of a body that had been told it didn't get to stay broken, the rest of him began the process of reassembling. The sound was not pleasant. Bones finding their correct positions, tissue reknitting, in the puncture wound in his chest cycling through a rapid compressed version of the healing process that had kept Wade Wilson alive through things that had no business leaving survivors. He stood up. He was still holding both katanas. "Okay," he said, and his voice had changed slightly. Still Wade, still carrying the essential Wadeness of the man, but with a layer underneath it that was paying very serious attention now. That was rude, and also incredibly cool, but mostly rude. Scorpion stared. He had killed a great many people. He had, in the service of various masters and in the pursuit of various vengeances, ended lives that had believed themselves difficult to end. He had not, in his time as the Spectre, in his years of Netherrealm existence, in his entire long, brutal career as one of the most dangerous beings across multiple realms, watched someone take a spear through the chest and stand back up, complaining about etiquette. He attacked with everything. What followed was 3 minutes of the most one-sided beating that Shang Tsung's courtyard had ever hosted. And Shang Tsung's courtyard had hosted 10,000 years of tournament violence. Scorpion was not holding back. Scorpion did not have a holding back setting. Hellfire erupted from his hands in concentrated bursts that hit Wade like a furnace door opening directly onto his body. The temperature differential between Netherrealm fire and normal combustion meant that the burns went deep. Not just tissue, but something underneath tissue. Something that Wade's healing factor had to work significantly harder to address, the flames carrying a metaphysical charge that sat at the edge of what purely physical regeneration could handle. Wade burned. Wade was hit with the chain 17 times. Wade was slammed into stone, into the ground, into the air, back into stone. Wade was, on by any reasonable metric, losing comprehensively. He also would not stay down. Every time Scorpion put him on the ground, the healing factor brought him back. Not instantly. There was a window, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds for the worst damage, where Wade was genuinely down, where the Netherrealm fire had pushed his regeneration to its limits, and his body was staging a furious biological argument about whether to continue. But it always won the argument. He always stood back up. And every time he stood back up, he had learned something. By the 4th recovery, he'd mapped Scorpion's chain timing. By the 7th, he'd identified the half-second delay between Hellfire release and the follow-up strike. By the 10th, bleeding from wounds that were already closing, suit scorched in patterns that would have been fatal to anyone without his specific biological situation, he'd assembled a complete tactical picture of Scorpion's combat rhythm. He started fighting back, and not winning, not yet, not against Scorpion at full force, but fighting back in a way that was qualitatively different from what had come before. The katanas weren't deflecting anymore. They were countering. When the chain came, he moved with it instead of away from it, using the pull to close distance instead of surrendering it. When the hellfire erupted, he rolled through the edge of it rather than away from the center, taking less damage and emerging closer than Scorpion expected. No, Scorpion caught one of Wade's katanas on his forearm guard. The blade skidded along it. Wade used the resistance to pivot, got behind Scorpion's reach, and hit him with an elbow strike to the base of the skull that would have dropped a normal human being. Scorpion turned to face him, and for just a moment, a fraction of a moment, something in the Spectre's bearing shifted. Not respect, not exactly, but the specific recalibration of a warrior who has identified that something is different from what he initially assessed. "Get over here," Scorpion said. and the chain came again, and this time Wade grabbed it. The look on Scorpion's face, the specific expression of a being who had used that technique for decades without anyone having the audacity to catch it, was, Wade decided, absolutely worth every second of the beating that had preceded it. He was dragged forward anyway, and the strength differential was not something his grip strength could fully compensate for. But he was laughing when he hit the ground, and healing before he stopped sliding, and back on his feet before Scorpion had reset his stance. "Finish him," Wade said, in his best announcer voice. Across the courtyard, Liu Kang uncrossed his arms. Shang Tsung was smiling. This was, he was beginning to understand, going to be considerably more interesting than he had planned. Raiden arrived the way thunder arrives, with the specific presumption of something that has decided its entrance is the most important thing currently happening. The lightning came first, a crack of white-blue that split the orange sky and left afterimages burning on the inside of the eyelid. Then the Thunder God himself, descending into the courtyard in a controlled fall that managed to be simultaneously practical and theatrical. White robes settling around him as he landed, conical hat casting a shadow that the torchlight bent around respectfully. He was older than the island, older than the tournament. He carried the specific weight of a deity who had spent millennia making decisions on behalf of people who hadn't asked him to and had developed over those millennia the unshakable conviction that this was the correct approach. He surveyed the courtyard. He took in the scorch marks, the cracked stone, the chain impact divots in the walls, the still smoking patches where Netherrealm fire had burned hot enough to leave permanent discoloration in rock that had survived 10,000 years of tournament violence. His eyes found Wade Wilson, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, eating a chimichanga he had produced from somewhere and watching Scorpion with the attentive appreciation of a man at a very good concert. Scorpion was standing 12 feet away, not attacking, and in the specific posture of a warrior who has temporarily run out of actions that produce expected results and is recalibrating. The demonstration bout had ended not with a winner, but with a mutual understanding. Scorpion could hurt Wade extensively and repeatedly, and Wade would keep standing up. And at some point, the mathematics of that equation produced an outcome that neither of them had fully resolved yet. Raiden looked at all of this, and then looked at Shang Tsung. And Shang Tsung spread his hands in a gesture of elegant innocence that had never once, in 10,000 years of practice, convinced anyone of anything. "Thunder God," Wade said, without looking up from the chimichanga. "You're taller than I expected. Also, the hat is a choice, a bold choice. I respect it. Please don't hit me with lightning right now. I've had a morning." Raiden descended on Wade with the energy of a man who had not had his authority casually acknowledged and immediately deprioritized since approximately the Third Age. He stopped 6 feet away, which was close enough for the ambient electrical charge around his body to make Wade's suit crackle slightly, and fixed him with the look, the Raiden look, the one that had made warlords reconsider their life choices and demons retreat to reassess their tactical options. While Wade finished the chimichanga. "You are the anomaly," Raiden said. The word anomaly carried considerable freight in a universe governed by Elder God law. It meant something that existed outside the established framework, something that required categorization before it could be properly addressed. You did not arrive through sanctioned means. You are not of this realm, or of Outworld, or of any realm I recognize. Marvel Universe, Wade said helpfully. Art, specifically the subset of it that contains maximum personal tragedy and comedic deflection. You wouldn't know it. Different fiction entirely. Well, same fiction now, technically, from a certain angle, which is... You know what? We can table the ontological stuff. You fight for Earthrealm, Raiden said. It was not quite a question. That's what I told the soul-eating travel agent over there, yeah. Raiden looked at Shang Tsung again, and the look contained several centuries of accumulated wariness. Then he looked back at Wade with the expression of a deity performing a very rapid cost-benefit analysis. Earthrealm needed champions. The tournament's timeline was pressing. Shang Tsung's Outworld forces were formidable, and Earthrealm's defenders, while exceptional, were finite in number and thoroughly mortal in the ways that mattered. A warrior who could not be permanently killed was, from a purely strategic standpoint, an extraordinary asset. The Thunder God did not like that his strategic calculations were producing this conclusion, but he was too old to ignore useful data. "You will need guidance," Raiden said. "This tournament operates under laws you do not yet understand. The Elder God's framework is okay, so here's where I have to stop you," Wade said, standing up and dusting chimichanga crumbs off his scorched suit. "You're right, because I've heard some version of this speech before, and it always ends the same way. You're going to tell me there are rules, and the rules are important, and following the rules is how we protect Earthrealm, and you need me to operate within your strategic framework. And I get it. I actually genuinely get it. You've been doing this for millennia. You have context I don't have. The Elder Gods are real, and their framework has teeth." He paused. "But here's my thing, Raiden. I don't do well with command structures. I have a documented history, very well documented, extensively documented. There are files in multiple government agencies, of following orders right up until the moment the orders become the problem, and then doing something creative that makes everyone angry, but usually works." He looked at Raiden steadily. "So, I'll fight for Earthrealm, genuinely, sincerely, not as a bit. But I'm not your soldier. I'm not your piece on the board. The second you start moving me around like a resource, we're going to have a disagreement that neither of us has time for." The courtyard was very quiet. Liu Kang, who had been listening from the archway, had the expression of a man watching something he'd thought about himself but would never have said directly to the Thunder God's face. Raiden studied Wade for a long moment. The electrical charge around him fluctuated slightly. Not a threat, was more like weather responding to the god's internal state. He had guided Earthrealm's champions for 10,000 years. He had chosen warriors, trained warriors, sacrificed warriors when the mathematics of cosmic law demanded it. He had made decisions that had cost people everything, justified by stakes that dwarfed individual cost. He had never had a champion preempt the argument before it started. "What would you require?" Raiden said carefully. "Wanted to commit fully to Earthrealm's defense?" "3 things," Wade said immediately, holding up fingers. 1, I fight my way. No tactical constraints, no approved target lists, no "you can't hit Shang Tsung outside of sanctioned bouts." If something threatens Earthrealm and I can address it, I address it. 2, you tell me the actual truth about this tournament. All of it. The parts you tell your champions and the parts you don't. Because there are always parts you don't. And when I function better with complete information than with managed information. 3. He lowered his hand, and his voice shifted slightly. The humor still present, but thinner now. Something more direct, visible underneath. Nobody on Earthrealm's side gets sacrificed for the greater good while I'm here. That's a hard line, non-negotiable. I've been the sacrificed piece before. I know what it feels like. We're not doing it. Raiden was quiet for a long time. Thus, the third condition had landed differently than the first 2. There was something in it that the Thunder God, who had made exactly the kind of decisions that condition was designed to prevent, and who carried the weight of those decisions in the specific way that immortals carry their worst choices, not forgetting, never forgetting, just adding them to a growing architecture of necessity, could not simply dismiss. "You are," Raiden said finally, was extraordinarily difficult. "I've been told," Wade agreed. "Also unkillable, which in my experience makes the difficult part more of a feature than a bug." Liu Kang approached for the first time, moving with the unhurried directness of a Shaolin champion who had decided to engage on his own terms. He stopped beside Raiden and looked at Wade with clear eyes and the specific focused calm of a man who judged by action rather than reputation. "Maha, the tournament does not care about your conditions," Liu Kang said. Not unkindly, simply as fact, the way a man who has accepted a terrible burden states its weight. Outworld's fighters are not constrained by mercy. Shang Tsung has spent decades preparing for this. Whatever you are, whatever you can do, it will be tested in ways that conditions cannot protect you from. "I know," Wade said. And for a moment, just a moment, the humor was entirely absent, and what remained was something older and tireder and completely clear-eyed. "I've been tested, lots of times, in lots of ways. I'm still here." He looked between Liu Kang and Raiden. That's kind of the whole point. From across the courtyard, Shang Tsung watched the three of them and turned a thought over in his mind, with the careful attention of a collector identifying unexpected value. The Thunder God was already compromised by this anomaly. The champion of Earthrealm was already calibrating to it. And the anomaly itself, for all its chaos, for all its noise and deflection and deliberate unpredictability, had just revealed three things it cared about deeply enough to name as conditions. Information, Shang Tsung knew, was always the most valuable currency. He filed all three conditions carefully. He would need them later. Quan Chi did not attend the tournament openly. This was, in itself, information. Shang Tsung hosted. Shao Kahn schemed from Outworld's throne with the patience of a conqueror who had learned that anticipation was its own form of power. The fighters competed, bled, won, lost, died in the specific ways that Mortal Kombat's framework sanctioned. But Quan Chi moved in the spaces between the official structure, in the shadows behind the shadows, and in the conversations that happened after the torches were dimmed, in the particular darkness that exists in a universe when its most dangerous sorcerer is not the one everyone is watching. Wade found him on the third night. Or rather, Quan Chi allowed Wade to find him, which was a distinction that mattered enormously, and that Wade, whose fourth wall awareness gave him a unique relationship with narrative causality, recognized immediately. Or the eastern edge of Shang Tsung's island dropped to a cliff above black water. The ocean here was wrong in the way that everything on this island was wrong. Too still, too dark, the surface reflecting the green-threaded sky without distortion, as if the water itself was paying attention. Wade had come here because he didn't sleep well. He never slept well. The healing factor kept interrupting with maintenance cycles that felt like very short, violent dreams. And because the combination of ocean air and existential dread was weirdly comfortable for a man with his specific psychological architecture. Quan Chi was standing at the cliff's edge, looking at the water as if the water owed him something. He was pale in the way that things are pale when color has been deliberately removed rather than simply absent. White skin, red face markings that carried the specific aesthetic of someone who had decided that subtlety was for people without access to dark sorcery. Black armor that absorbed light with unusual commitment. He radiated the cold of the Netherrealm, not the heat of Scorpion's hellfire, but its opposite. A chill that came from proximity to a place where warmth was a resource that had been fully exploited centuries ago. "You've been watching me since I arrived," Wade said, sitting on a rock 12 feet from the cliff's edge, because the combination of immortality and heights still produced an instinctive biological protest he'd never fully resolved. "Not Shang Tsung watching me. He watches everyone. That's just his whole thing. You watching me specifically. Different flavor, more like," he considered, "assessment. Like you're calculating something." Quan Chi turned from the water. His eyes were pale and carried the flat, evaluative quality of a man for whom other beings were primarily interesting in terms of their utility. He had engineered the destruction of the Shirai Ryu, had manipulated Scorpion's resurrection for decades, had constructed alliances and betrayals across multiple realms with the architectural patience of someone who understood that the longest schemes were the ones that succeeded. He looked at Wade with those flat, pale eyes and said, "Your soul is extraordinary." "I get that a lot today," Wade said. "It's very flattering and also slightly alarming every time." "I have studied souls for centuries," Quan Chi said, moving away from the cliff's edge with a step that was entirely too smooth, the walk of something that had made peace with being fundamentally unsettling. "I have harvested them, cataloged them, weaponized them. I have consumed the spiritual essence of warriors, sorcerers, demons, and gods, and I have never encountered a soul with your particular property." "The healing?" Wade guessed. "The awareness." Quan Chi stopped 10 feet away. The chill radiating off him was more pronounced at this distance. Not uncomfortable exactly, more like standing near an open freezer in a universe that had opinions about temperature. Your soul perceives itself, not in the way that conscious beings perceive their own existence. That is universal, a basic property of sapient life. Your soul perceives its own narrative position. It knows it is being observed. It knows it exists within a story. A pause, precise and deliberate. Do you understand what that means, in a universe where souls are currency? Wade was quiet for a moment. The ocean was quiet. The wrong-colored sky above them was quiet in the way that things are quiet when they're waiting. "It means I'm hard to steal," Wade said. "It means you are impossible to steal," Quan Chi corrected. "Novkara, a soul that perceives its own narrative cannot be consumed by conventional means. It cannot be imprisoned in the Netherrealm's standard framework. It cannot be weaponized the way other souls are weaponized, because it maintains coherent self-reference even under metaphysical assault." He tilted his head. "Shang Tsung has already discovered this. He read your soul in the courtyard and found something that resisted categorization. He will not tell you this, because information is his primary resource, but the read disturbed him. And you're telling me because..." Wade let the question hang. "Because I want something you have," Quan Chi said, with the specific directness of a man who had found that stating desire plainly was more effective than concealing it when the target was sufficiently intelligent to see through concealment anyway. "And I am prepared to offer you something you want in return." Wade looked at him, and the humor was present but had moved to the back, the way humor moves to the back when something is genuinely important. And the person who uses humor as a survival mechanism knows they need to actually pay attention. "What do I have that you want?" he asked. "Access," Quan Chi said. "Your soul's self-referential property means it exists partially outside this universe's metaphysical framework. You are, in a technical sense, a hole in the fabric of this reality's soul economy. Through you, I could potentially access soul energy from realms beyond this universe's jurisdiction. The implications for my research are..." A pause that carried genuine feeling for the first time. Something that, in a being with less controlled affect, would have been excitement. Considerable. Wade absorbed this. And what are you offering me? Here, Quan Chi did something unexpected. He reached into the dark geometry of his armor and produced a small object, a vial, black glass, sealed with wax that had been pressed with a sigil Wade didn't recognize. He held it out. Your healing factor repairs physical damage, Quan Chi said. It reconstitutes tissue, bone, organ. It has even imperfectly addressed the Netherrealm fire's metaphysical charge. But there are wounds in your soul, Wade Wilson, that physical regeneration cannot touch. Of wounds that have been there so long you have built your entire personality around the fact of their permanence. The vial caught the green-threaded light. I can heal them. The silence that followed was the longest silence Wade had produced since arriving on the island. He looked at the vial. The offer was real. He could feel it, could feel the truth of it through the same fourth-wall awareness that let him read narrative causality and the sense that this was a genuine capability being genuinely offered. Quan Chi could do what he was claiming. The sorcerer's expertise in soul manipulation was, in this universe, without equal. He thought about the wounds. He knew exactly which ones Quan Chi meant. The ones that predated the Weapon X program, predated the cancer, predated the healing factor. The ones that had been there so long, he'd stopped noticing them the way you stopped noticing a scar. The ones that the humor was load-bearing around. He thought about what access meant, what Quan Chi would do with a hole in the universe's soul economy. What considerable implications for his research meant when the researcher was a man who had enslaved Scorpion's soul for decades and considered it a moderate professional accomplishment. He thought about the third condition he'd given Raiden. Nobody on Earthrealm's side gets sacrificed for the greater good. The vial glinted. That's a genuinely good offer, Wade said. Like, legitimately good. You did your homework. You found the real thing instead of the thing I pretend is the real thing, which takes either excellent soul reading or a very unsettling amount of research, and I'm not sure which is worse. He looked at Quan Chi's pale eyes. But here's the thing about wounds you've had long enough. You figure out how to use them. The healing factor's great for bodies. The rest of it. He paused, and there was something in the pause that was neither humor nor deflection, but just the plain weight of a person who has thought about this more than anyone should have to. The rest of it you carry. That's just what you do. He stood up from the rock. I'm not your access point, he said. Whatever you're building toward, and I can feel the outline of it, the shape of the scheme. It's big, and it involves the Netherrealm, and it involves more souls than I want to think about. I'm not part of it. Quan Chi regarded him for a moment, the flat pale eyes unreadable in the way that truly dangerous things are unreadable. You will reconsider, he said. Not a threat, a statement of projected probability. Maybe, Wade said honestly. I've made worse decisions, but not tonight. He walked back toward the tournament compound, and behind him Quan Chi turned back to the water, and the vial disappeared back into the dark geometry of his armor. And the ocean stayed wrong and still and attentive. In the Netherrealm's distant architecture, something filed the conversation away. It would be patient. It was always patient. Outworld smelled like iron and old fire, and the specific atmospheric signature of a realm that had been conquered so many times, it had stopped bothering to remember what it had originally smelled like before the conquering started. Wade arrived the way most people arrived in Outworld against their preferences, through a portal that hadn't been his idea, unopened by a sorcerer who had decided that the anomaly needed to be evaluated in a context where Earthrealm's thunder god wasn't within lightning striking distance. Shang Tsung had been direct about it, which Wade had found refreshing and alarming in equal measure. There are those in Outworld who wish to assess you personally. Your cooperation in this matter is not required, but your transportation is already arranged. The portal had opened in the tournament compound's eastern corridor at a time when Wade had been alone, which suggested either surveillance or prophecy, and he wasn't sure which was more invasive. He stepped through into a sky the color of a bruise. Outworld's capital spread below and around him, with the aggressive architectural confidence of an empire that had never once considered the possibility of restraint. Structures of black stone and dark metal rose in configurations that prioritized dominance over function. Towers that served no practical purpose except to be tall. Walls that extended far beyond any defensive necessity, everything scaled for beings larger than human standard, as if the Empire's fundamental aesthetic philosophy was, you should feel small here. The streets, visible from the elevated platform where the portal had deposited him, you moved with the specific energy of a population that had learned to keep its head down and its pace purposeful. Tarkatans moved through the market district with the swaggering entitlement of an occupying force, their mouth blades catching the bruise-colored light. Outworld citizens, the native population, the ones who had been here before Shao Kahn's expansion began, but the ones for whom home had become a complicated word, navigated around them with the practiced spatial awareness of people who had learned exactly how much distance was enough. Wade stood on the platform and looked at all of it and felt something shift in his chest that wasn't humor. He'd seen oppression before. He'd lived in its margins, had the institutional scarring to prove it. But there was something about seeing it at this scale, structured into the literal architecture of a place, built into the stone and the street layout and the practiced flinch of people moving through their own home. Something about that specific flavor of normalized cruelty that landed differently than he expected. He filed it. He didn't put it down, just moved it somewhere he could find it later. A Tarkatan escort was waiting at the platform's base. 6 of them, mouth blades partially extended in the specific configuration that said, "We are not currently attacking you, but we want you to know we could." Their leader was larger than the others, with old scars layered over older scars and eyes that assessed Wade with the flat professional hostility of a soldier who has been told to deliver something to its destination intact and resents the implication that intact is a meaningful constraint. "You will come," the leader said, and in the specific tone of a sentence that had decided to skip the question mark. "Bold opener," Wade said. "No welcome to Outworld, no complimentary beverage, nothing. The hospitality industry here has real room for growth." He fell into step behind the escort because the alternative involved fighting 6 Tarkatans in an unfamiliar environment with no intel on the local power structure, and even Wade's risk assessment, which was famously permissive, suggested that was suboptimal. "Where are we going?" The leader said nothing. "Right, silent type, scorpion energy. You all practice that, or does it come naturally?" They brought him to a structure at the capital's center that was larger than the buildings around it, in the specific way that the seats of power are always larger, always positioned higher, always designed to make the approach feel like a gradual acknowledgement of your own insignificance. The throne room's doors were 30 feet of black iron, worked with relief carvings of conquest, battles, subjugations, the specific iconography of an empire that had decided its history was its best decoration. Shao Kahn was waiting. Wade had known, intellectually, that the Emperor of Outworld was large. The tournament's framework had established this. The visual record he'd assembled from fourth wall-adjacent memory had established this. And actually standing in the same room and experiencing the physical reality of Shao Kahn's presence was a different calibration entirely. The Emperor sat on a throne that had been built to make its occupant look imposing and had been given excellent raw material to work with. Massive, armored in a way that suggested the armor was an aesthetic choice rather than a necessity. The skull-faced helmet casting shadows that the throne room's torchlight arranged itself around respectfully. He held the Wrathhammer across his knees with the casual possession of a man holding something that was both tool and statement. He looked at Wade the way mountains look at weather. "The anomaly," Shao Kahn said. His voice was the specific register of something that had spent millennia projecting across battlefields and had never needed to adjust for smaller spaces. It hit the walls and came back. Shang Tsung's reports were colorful. "I've been called worse," Wade said. "Also better. Mostly worse. You fight for Earthrealm." Not contempt exactly. More like the specific neutrality of a conqueror for whom Earthrealm was a resource rather than an enemy. Something to be absorbed rather than opposed. "I do." "Why?" The question was genuine, which was more unsettling than rhetorical would have been. Shao Kahn leaned forward slightly, the Wrathhammer shifting on his knees. "You are not of Earthrealm. You have no investment in its survival. Your presence here is accident, not destiny. You owe that realm nothing." A pause. "Yet, you align with its defenders against an empire that could offer you considerably more than Raiden's restrictions and Liu Kang's moral framework. Is this a recruitment pitch?" Wade asked. "Because the decor is very on the nose for a recruitment pitch. Very, join me and together we will rule energy. The hammer especially. The hammer is really doing a lot of work." Shao Kahn's expression did not change. The Wade had the specific sense of a man whose patience was geological in scale. Not absent, just operating on a time frame that individual provocations couldn't meaningfully affect. "I have conquered 37 realms," the Emperor said. "Each had its defenders. Each had its champions who believed their cause was righteous and their strength sufficient. Each fell. He stood, and standing, he was something that the room reorganized itself around. The gravity of his presence redistributing the space. I do not offer alliance from weakness. I offer it because an unkillable warrior with no fixed allegiance is either the most valuable piece on the board or the most dangerous variable. I prefer valuable pieces to dangerous variables." Wade looked at him. Really looked, past the scale, past the theater of the throne room, past the practiced intimidation of the approach and the posture and the voice that came back off the walls. Then he looked at the 37 conquered realms implicit in everything around him. He looked at the streets outside, the Tarkatans in the market district, the practiced flinch of the native population moving through a home that had become a demonstration of someone else's power. "Here's what I know about empires," Wade said. And his voice had the quality it got when the humor had moved all the way to the back. And what remained was the thing underneath, and the thing that had survived Weapon X and bone cancer and every other thing the universe had put him through. They're built on the idea that some people's comfort is worth other people's everything. That the math works out if you're the one doing the math and not the one being calculated. He looked at Shao Kahn steadily. "I've been the one being calculated. It leaves a mark." The throne room was very quiet. Shao Kahn studied him for a long moment. The geological patience held no anger, from no threat, just the flat assessment of a conqueror recategorizing a variable. "You refuse? I refuse. Then you are a dangerous variable." "Yeah," Wade agreed. "I really am." The escort materialized from the room's edges, mouth blades fully extended now, the pretense of civility concluded. Wade counted them. 12, which was more than the 6 that had brought him, which meant the room had been set up for this outcome as one of its contingencies. which meant Shao Kahn had expected the refusal and prepared for it, which was either impressive strategic thinking or just the habitual caution of a man who had conquered 37 realms and learned not to assume. Wade drew both katanas. "So," he said, settling into a stance. The humor back now in full force because that was what it was for. That was the whole point of it. "Are we doing this here, or do you want to take it outside? Because the throne is very nice, and I'd hate to chip it." The 12 Tarkatans were good. Wade would acknowledge that freely and without reservation. They were fast, disciplined in the specific way that soldiers are disciplined when the consequence of indiscipline in their empire is something they've watched happen to other soldiers, and their mouth blades were not a cosmetic feature. The blades extended from the jaw in a configuration that turned every grapple into a potential fatality. That made close combat the specific kind of intimate violence, where the person being stabbed and the person doing the stabbing were occupying the same space. And that meant every instinct Wade had about closing distance had to be revised against the reality of what closing distance meant when your opponent's face was also a weapon. He closed distance anyway, not recklessly, tactically, using the katanas to control the mouth blade angles, keeping the tips occupied with deflection while his body moved through the gaps in their defensive geometry. The first Tarkatan went down when Wade got inside its reach and hit the back of its knee with a strike that didn't need the blade, just physics and the specific knowledge of where joints fail. The second caught a katana across the forearm that would have been a clean disarm on a human opponent, but on a Tarkatan produced a spray of dark blood and a sound of genuine offense. Like the creature couldn't believe the audacity. He was hit 6 times in the first 30 seconds. Mouth blades caught his shoulder, his side, his left thigh. A strike from behind that he tracked but couldn't fully avoid took him across the back in a diagonal line that his healing factor cataloged as deep, significant. "Give me a moment." He went down on one knee, came back up before the follow-through arrived, and kept moving. Shao Kahn watched from the throne and did not intervene, and this was information. A ruler who sat and watched his soldiers fight an opponent that was clearly handling them, not winning, being handled. There was a difference. One implied dominance, and the other implied professional assessment. Was a ruler who was still learning something. Wade filed it while simultaneously putting his elbow through a Tarkatan's jaw in a way that produced a sound like someone dropping a bag of gravel. So by the time the throne room's violence had reached its natural conclusion, 4 Tarkatans down, 2 retreated to the room's edges, 6 standing but reassessing with the body language of soldiers who had encountered an unexpected result and were waiting for updated orders. Wade was bleeding from a number of locations that his healing factor was addressing with varying degrees of urgency and standing between Shao Kahn and the throne room's main door. "I'm going to leave now," Wade said. He was breathing harder than he'd like, but his voice was steady. "Through that door, then through whatever's between that door and the portal back to the island, then through the portal. You can try to stop me, which will extend this significantly, or you can let me go, because you've already learned what you wanted to learn from watching me fight your soldiers." Shao Kahn was quiet for 3 seconds. "And what did I learn?" "That I get back up, every time, no matter what." Wade looked at him. "Which means I'm not a resource you can expend and replace. I'm a fixed cost with no ceiling. And in your calculation of how to handle dangerous variables, that specific property makes me more trouble than I'm worth to contain." A pause. "Also, I'm genuinely concerned about those 2 guys by the wall. One of them needs medical attention that I feel bad about." Another 3 seconds of geological silence. Then Shao Kahn made a small gesture with the wrath hammer. Not a strike, a dismissal, but the specific motion of a conqueror, tabling something for later consideration. The soldiers at the door moved aside. Wade walked out. The portal back to the island was where it needed to be, because narrative causality in a universe this structured tended to provide exits when exits were the next required plot point. And Wade's fourth wall awareness had learned to trust that particular property even when it made no physical sense. Nor he stepped through and landed back on the tournament island in the gray pre-dawn light, bleeding and healing and carrying something heavier than the physical damage. Liu Kang found him at the cliff's edge 20 minutes later, sitting in the same spot where Quan Chi had made his offer 2 nights before. The Shaolin champion moved without sound across the stone and sat beside him without asking permission, and which Wade noted as the specific behavior of someone who had decided to skip the social preamble because the situation didn't warrant it. "Outworld," Liu Kang said. Not a question. "Outworld," Wade confirmed. They sat with the ocean below them and the wrong-colored sky beginning its transition toward whatever passed for dawn in this realm. The green at the horizon deepening to something closer to gold, and Liu Kang waited with the patience of a man trained in the specific discipline of letting silence do its work. "There are people in that city," Wade said. "Just people, living their lives in a place that's been turned into a demonstration of someone else's power. Going around the Tarkatans in the market, keeping their eyes down." He paused. "I've seen that before. Different contexts, same math." Liu Kang was quiet for a moment. "Outworld's people have lived under Shao Kahn's rule for generations. Some have never known anything else. That's not the same as being okay with it," Wade said. "No," Liu Kang agreed. "It is not." Wade looked at him. The Shaolin champion had the specific quality of a person whose moral clarity wasn't simple. Wasn't the uncomplicated heroism of someone who'd never been tested, but the hard-won certainty of someone who'd looked at the cost and decided it was worth paying anyway. There was grief in it and resolve, and the particular loneliness of a person who has accepted a burden that most people would put down. Wade recognized it because he carried a different version of the same weight. "Why do you do it?" Wade asked. "The tournament, the defending. You know what the stakes are. 10 wins and Outworld invades anyway through legitimate means. And Shao Kahn doesn't exactly strike me as someone who plays by rules he finds inconvenient. You're fighting a structure that's already tilted against you. Raiden's moving you around like a chess piece, whether you've noticed it or not. Shang Tsung cheats in ways that are probably impossible to fully account for." He looked at the wrong-colored dawn. "Why keep fighting?" Liu Kang turned the question over for a moment with the visible consideration of someone who has asked it himself, late at night, in the specific hours when certainty is hardest to maintain. "So because the people in that market need someone too," he said simply. Wade absorbed that. It was not a complicated answer. It was not a tactical answer or a philosophical framework or a cost-benefit analysis. It was just the plain weight of a person who had looked at the world and decided that the fact of need was sufficient justification for response, regardless of odds or outcome. Wade had built his entire survival architecture around irony and distance, and the specific protective function of never being entirely serious. He had done it because seriousness had been historically the vector for everything that had hurt him worst. Being serious meant investing, and investing meant losing, and he had lost enough things that the healing factor couldn't touch. He looked at Liu Kang and felt something shift that was neither humor nor deflection. "On the Tarkatans in the market," he said. "The enslaved souls Quan Chi's been collecting. The people in Outworld who keep their eyes down." He stopped. "Then, I'm going to need to know where Quan Chi's soul vault is." Liu Kang looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" Wade stood up. The healing factor had finished its current round of maintenance. The wounds from the throne room were closed. He rolled his shoulders, checked both katanas. He counted ammunition with the reflexive efficiency of a mercenary who had learned that the moment you stopped tracking your resources was the moment you needed them most. "Because," he said. And the humor was back now, but it had changed color, had taken on the specific quality of something that had decided what it was for. "I just figured out what my moral line is in this universe. And Quan Chi's been on the wrong side of it since before I got here." He looked at Liu Kang. "Man, I'm going to need backup," he said. "And I'm going to need you to trust me even when my methods look insane. Which, full disclosure, they are going to look insane." Liu Kang studied him for a long moment with those clear, focused eyes. Then, for the first time since Wade had arrived on the island, the Shaolin champion smiled. It was a small smile, controlled, the smile of a man who didn't give them freely and meant it when he did. "I have fought beside Raiden's chosen champions for years," Liu Kang said. "I am familiar with insane methods." "Perfect," Wade said, "because what I'm planning makes Raiden's methods look like a strongly worded letter." Above them, the wrong-colored dawn finished arriving. And somewhere in the tournament compound, a gong sounded for the morning's matches. And in the Netherrealm's distant architecture, Quan Chi felt something shift in the metaphysical fabric of his carefully constructed plans, and he looked up from his work. And for the first time in a very long time, the sorcerer felt something he had nearly forgotten the texture of: uncertainty. The soul vault was not on the island. This was the first complication, and it was a significant one. Wade had assumed, reasonably, he felt, given the tournament's logistical framework, that Quan Chi would keep his primary operation within the tournament's geographic footprint, close to the action, close to the fresh supply of souls that combat inevitably produced, close to the sorcerous infrastructure that Shang Tsung's island provided. It was the obvious choice. It was the choice a sorcerer made if they were prioritizing convenience over security. Quan Chi did not prioritize convenience over security. The vault existed in a pocket dimension, accessible only through a specific portal that Quan Chi opened and closed on a schedule that had no observable pattern. Wade and Liu Kang had watched the sorcerer's movements for 2 days with the focused attention of people who understood that surveillance was the foundation of everything that came after, and the portal's appearances had defeated every attempt at pattern recognition. It opened in different locations. It stayed open for different durations. Its spatial signature, the specific metaphysical resonance of a dimensional aperture, which Liu Kang could sense through his Shaolin training. And Wade could sense through the fourth wall awareness that gave him a persistent, low-level read on the narrative geography of wherever he was. Changed each time, suggesting either active counter-surveillance protocols or a level of habitual operational security that had become instinctive. "He knows someone might look," Wade said on the evening of the second day, eating the last of his backup chimichangas with the focused energy of a man consuming a resource he couldn't replace. "He always knows someone might look," Liu Kang said. Quan Chi assumes hostile observation as a baseline condition. Then he has survived in environments where everyone was his enemy by treating paranoia as professionalism. "Okay, so we can't follow him in," Wade thought. "And we can't predict the portal. And going through Shang Tsung's network to find the vault's location is a non-starter, because Shang Tsung is Quan Chi's nominal ally and would absolutely trade that information for something useful." He paused. "Which means we need Quan Chi to take us there himself." Liu Kang looked at him with the expression of a man who has learned to evaluate unconventional proposals on their merits rather than their surface plausibility. He would not willingly lead enemies to his vault. "No," Wade agreed. "He'd lead something he thought he controlled, something that represented an opportunity significant enough to override his caution. He looked at Liu Kang. He offered to heal my soul wounds, the real ones. He has the capability, and he genuinely wants the access my soul's metaphysical properties would give him. He tapped his temple. I'm the opportunity. I just have to convince him. The answer changed. You would deceive him into believing you've accepted his offer. I would deceive a man who enslaved Scorpion's soul for decades and has been collecting the spiritual essence of dead warriors in a dimensional vault for purposes that are definitely not wholesome. Yes. He looked at Liu Kang steadily. I know it's not clean. I know it's not the Shaolin way. I'm not asking you to be the one who does the deceiving. That part's mine. I'm asking you to be ready for what comes after we're inside. Liu Kang was quiet for a long moment. The moral weight of the thing sat between them with genuine presence. Not a small consideration, not a detail to be rationalized away. Liu Kang's code was not performative. It was structural, but the architecture of a person who had decided what they would and wouldn't do, and had held that line through pressures that would have bent most people. The soul's in that vault, Liu Kang said finally. How many? I don't know exactly. Enough that whatever Quan Chi's building toward is significantly larger than anything he's done before. Wade paused. Enough that the people they came from deserve to have someone try. Another silence. Then Liu Kang nodded once, the specific nod of a man who has located the version of a compromise he can live with. I will be ready. Wade found Quan Chi that night in the corridor behind the tournament's preparation chambers, which was where the sorcerer spent the hours between midnight and the pre-dawn performing the specific variety of dark practice that required privacy and ambient sorceress energy, and a location far enough from Raiden's observation that the Thunder God's divine senses couldn't easily reach. And I've been thinking about your offer, Wade said. Quan Chi turned with a smoothness that suggested he'd known Wade was there before Wade had announced himself. The pale eyes assessed. Have you? The soul wounds. Wade kept his voice level and let something through that was real. Not fabricated, not performed. The actual weight of what those wounds were and what it would mean to have them addressed. And he was a good enough liar to know that the best lies were the ones with genuine material at their center. I said I carry them, that I've figured out how to use them. That's true. He looked at Quan Chi. But carrying something and being okay with carrying it aren't the same thing. And I've been thinking about what you said, that you could actually fix it, not manage it, not work around it. Fix it. A pause, precisely calibrated. I want to understand what that would actually look like before I decide. Quan Chi was still for 3 seconds. Wade counted them. The flat pale eyes moved through their assessment cycle, checking for deception, weighing probability, measuring the offer against the risk. What they found was a man who was genuinely conflicted, who was genuinely considering something he'd refused, who was carrying real wounds that a real offer had touched in a real place. The deception was in the omission, not the content. Wade was genuinely conflicted. The soul wounds were genuinely real. The consideration was genuine. The sorcerer could read souls with extraordinary precision. He could not, it turned out, read the specific layer of narrative awareness that told Wade exactly how this scene was supposed to go and what his role in it needed to be. The process requires my vault, Quan Chi said. The instruments I would need are not portable. Then show me the vault. Another 3 seconds. The caution against the opportunity, the calculation of risk against access. The paranoid professionalism that had kept Quan Chi operational through decades of multidirectional betrayal. And on the other side of the calculation, a hole in the universe's soul economy, a metaphysical property that existed nowhere else. Research implications that were, in the sorcerer's own word, considerable. The portal opened, and its spatial signature was different from every previous aperture Wade had observed. A new location, a new resonance, the counter-surveillance protocols running automatically. It opened onto darkness that had the specific quality of a space that had been separated from normal dimensional physics deliberately. A pocket of non-space that existed between the folds of Outworld's metaphysical geography. Wade stepped through. Liu Kang, moving with the silence of a Shaolin master who had spent decades learning to be precisely where he needed to be at precisely the right moment, came through in Wade's shadow before the portal could register a second presence. The vault was vast. Wade had expected a room. What he found was a cathedral of stolen souls, an architectural space that shouldn't have fit in a pocket dimension, but did because the dimension had been built to contain it, with walls of dark crystal that pulsed with trapped light, each pulse the compressed remnant of a person who had existed and fought and died, and had their final essence harvested and stored here. The sound was below hearing, but above feeling, a vibration in the chest that the mind eventually translated as voices. Not words, not coherent communication, just the persistent presence of accumulated personhood pressing against its container. Wade stood in it and felt the full weight of it land on him without the humor's protective mediation, because some things were too large for the humor to cover, and this was one of them. Hundreds, possibly thousands. The process will take time, Quan Chi said, moving toward a central apparatus of dark metal and crystal that was clearly the vault's operational heart. You should. Liu Kang, Wade said. The Shaolin champion was already moving. What followed was not a clean operation. Clean had never been the realistic expectation. Quan Chi was a sorcerer of centuries-deep expertise, operating in his own prepared environment, with access to instruments and wards and defensive sorcery that he'd had decades to refine. He reacted with the speed of a being for whom threat response was as automatic as breathing, a dark energy erupting from both hands in concentrated bursts that hit Liu Kang with enough force to send the champion into the crystal wall with a sound like a bell struck too hard. Wade took the next burst directly in the chest and went down. He got back up. Quan Chi hit him again, harder, the soul magic variant that went underneath physical tissue and addressed the metaphysical layer, the attack that his healing factor couldn't fully process. It felt like being turned inside out, slowly. It felt like the soul wounds reopening, the old ones, the ones that predated everything. He got back up anyway. You can keep doing that, Wade said, his voice rough in a way it hadn't been before, the soul magic damage leaving a residue that pure regeneration couldn't immediately clear. And I'll keep getting back up, and eventually Liu Kang recovers, and we do this the hard way. Or... He looked at Quan Chi through the specific clarity that comes when everything hurts, and the humor is all the way at the back, and what remains is just the plain truth of the thing. You tell me how to release them. He gestured at the walls, the pulsing trapped light, the hundreds, the thousands. Release them, Quan Chi said, with the specific contempt of a man hearing something that offends his professional investment and decades of work. We're built on people, Wade said. But who didn't choose this? Quan Chi did not tell them how to release the souls. This was, Wade reflected, the expected outcome. A man who had spent decades constructing a soul vault of this scale, who had engineered the destruction of an entire clan to produce a single controllable revenant, who had built his entire operational framework on the understanding that souls were currency and currency was power. That man did not fold because someone asked him to, with genuine feeling. The sincerity had landed, and Wade could see it in the flat, pale eyes, the specific micro-recalibration of a being who had encountered something that didn't fit his existing categories. But sincerity wasn't leverage, and Quan Chi operated on leverage. What he operated on instead was the vault's defensive architecture. The wards activated in sequence, not all at once, which would have been cruder, but in the specific cascading pattern of a system designed by someone who understood that overwhelming force was less effective than precision, that the goal was not to destroy intruders, but to separate them, disorient them, reduce the tactical problem to manageable components. The crystal walls shifted, the pocket dimensions geometry rearranged. Liu Kang, Yawas who had recovered from the initial strike and was moving with the focused intensity of a Shaolin champion who had located his objective and was pursuing it with everything, found the path between himself and the central apparatus suddenly longer than it had been, the space folding in ways that normal space declined to fold. Wade found himself in a section of vault that had separated from the main chamber, crystal walls on 3 sides and Quan Chi on the 4th. Astar, the sorcerer, moving with the unhurried precision of a man operating on home ground. "You have a property I want," Quan Chi said, raising both hands, dark energy building between his palms with the gathering quality of something being compressed before release. "I had hoped to acquire it through agreement. Agreement has proven unavailable." The energy peaked. Extraction is the alternative methodology. The blast hit Wade at point-blank range, not the physical variant, the soul variant. À full force, Quan Chi abandoning the measured approach and committing to the extraction attempt with everything the vault's ambient soul energy could amplify. It was the difference between being punched and being reached inside and grabbed, the difference between pain and the specific violation of having something fundamental to your existence treated as a resource to be harvested. Wade's healing factor screamed, not metaphorically. The biological emergency response that governed his regenerative system produced the closest thing to panic that his physiology was capable of. Every cell firing at maximum, trying to address damage that wasn't happening at the cellular level, trying to regenerate something that wasn't tissue. His body didn't know how to fix what was being done to his soul. His body was extraordinarily good at fixing bodies. This was not a body problem. He went to his knees. Quan Chi pressed the advantage with the clinical efficiency of a craftsman performing a procedure. The extraction was real. Wade could feel it, the fourth wall awareness registering the attempt as a narrative event of genuine weight, his soul's self-referential property activating in ways it had never needed to activate before. The part of him that knew it was in a story suddenly understanding that the story could end here. That being in a story didn't make you invincible, and that narrative awareness was a property of consciousness, and consciousness could be taken. He had told Quan Chi that a soul that perceived its own narrative couldn't be consumed by conventional means. Quan Chi had spent 2 days thinking about unconventional means. The extraction pulled. Wade pulled back, not physically, not with the healing factor, with the specific stubborn self-reference that was his soul's fundamental property, and the part of him that looked at the attempt to reduce him to a resource and said, "No, I know what I am. I know I'm here. I know this is happening, and I know I'm the one it's happening to, and that knowing is mine, and you cannot have it." It was, he would reflect later, the most Wade Wilson thing he had ever done. It was not enough. The extraction was too powerful, the vault's amplification too significant, Quan Chi's centuries of expertise too precisely applied. Wade felt himself beginning to thin, not physically, not in any way his healing factor could address, but in the way that a person thins when something essential is being removed. when the weight of selfhood begins to reduce. The humor was the first thing to go distant, which felt appropriate and terrible. Then the memories, not erased, but muffled, becoming less immediate, less his. Then Liu Kang came through the wall, not through a gap in the wall, through the wall itself, for the crystal shattering inward as the Shaolin champion hit it with a flying kick that had the entire weight of a man who had found his way through a folded pocket dimension through the specific combination of Shaolin spatial training and the absolute refusal to accept that a wall was a terminal obstacle. The impact scattered crystal shards across the section of vault, disrupted the geometric precision of the ward configuration, and broke Quan Chi's concentration in the specific way that concentration breaks when a significant physical event occurs in your immediate vicinity. The extraction interrupted. Wade's soul snapped back to full coherence with the jarring abruptness of a dreamer hitting the bed. Every muffled thing suddenly loud again, the humor returning with the slightly hysterical intensity of something that had almost been lost and was furious about it. He got up. He got up with both katanas drawn and the specific clarity of a person who has just experienced what it feels like to be treated as a resource and has updated their already strong feelings on the subject. And he looked at Quan Chi across the scattered crystal, and the thing in his eyes was not humor and not rage, but something that partook of both and was more purposeful than either. Quan Chi was already rebuilding the ward configuration, the dark energy reshaping the vault's geometry with the speed of a sorcerer working from memory. The extraction attempt suspended but not abandoned, his operational focus shifting to containment while he recalibrated. Liu Kang hit him with a fireball. The Shaolin champion's flames were not decorative. They were the product of decades of discipline, the physical expressions of a fighting spirit that had been refined through training and loss, and the specific heat of someone who had chosen, repeatedly and at significant personal cost, to keep fighting for people who didn't know he existed. The fireball hit Quan Chi's ward mid-construction, and the collision of energies produced a sound and a light that the vault's crystal walls caught and amplified and threw back in every direction. Quan Chi stumbled. Wade closed the distance. He didn't go for the kill, not because he was incapable of it, but because the kill wasn't the objective. The objective was the central apparatus. The vault's operational heart, the mechanism through which the soul collection was maintained, and through which he had correctly surmised during the 2 days of observation before this operation. The release would need to be processed. He hit the apparatus with both katanas simultaneously, not a strike but a lever, using the blades as tools rather than weapons, forcing the crystal housing open. The apparatus resisted. First, it was built to resist. Quan Chi had not constructed his primary operational infrastructure with vulnerability in mind. But it was built to resist conventional force applied by conventional means. And Wade was applying force with katanas that had spent weeks absorbing ambient Outworld energy and Netherrealm hellfire from Scorpion's repeated attempts to kill him, and the specific soul magic residue of Quan Chi's own extraction attempt. And the cumulative charge of all of that made the blade something the apparatus hadn't been designed to account for. The housing cracked. Quan Chi made a sound that was the most human thing Wade had heard from him. Not quite a shout. More like the vocalization of someone watching something irreplaceable break. The sound of decades of work fracturing along with the crystal. He hit Wade with everything he had left. The soul magic landed full force, and Wade went down for the 3rd time. The extraction resuming with the desperate urgency of a craftsman trying to salvage something from a catastrophe. The pulling sensation returning harder than before, Quan Chi abandoning precision for force, the flat, pale eyes for the first time carrying something that was not controlled assessment, but genuine desperation. Wade, on his knees, one katana gone, the soul magic damage accumulating in ways that the healing factor couldn't keep pace with. I'd looked at the cracked apparatus and the pulsing trapped light and the hundreds of compressed existences pressing against their containers. He looked at Liu Kang, who was fighting Quan Chi with everything. Fireball and kick and the specific relentless Shaolin assault of a champion who had trained his entire life for moments that required everything. He looked at the crack in the apparatus housing. He put his remaining katana into the crack, and he pushed. The housing didn't break cleanly. Nothing about this was clean. The crystal shattered in stages, each stage releasing a pulse of soul energy that hit the vault's atmosphere like a wave hitting a shore. And each wave disrupted the extraction attempt further, Quan Chi's focus fracturing as the infrastructure of his life's work came apart piece by piece. The carefully maintained soul economy of the vault destabilizing as the compressed existences began to find gaps, began to move, and began the process of returning to whatever came after the Netherrealm's harvesting was undone. The voices below hearing became voices above it. Not words, still not words, but presence, insistent, grateful, the specific quality of something that has been contained for a very long time, suddenly experiencing the possibility of not being contained anymore. It moved through the vault like wind, through a space that had never had wind, touching every crystal surface, every dark metal instrument, every ward and ward anchor and carefully maintained piece of the architecture of control. Quan Chi screamed. It was not a sound that fit the sorcerer's established register. It was the sound of a man experiencing loss at a scale that his operational detachment could not process. Every century of accumulated work undoing simultaneously, meant the research and the power and the carefully maintained leverage over Netherrealm politics and cross-dimensional soul trafficking dissolving into the vault's destabilizing atmosphere. Liu Kang hit him one more time. Quan Chi went down. He did not get back up. Not because he was dead. Wade was fairly certain the sorcerer was not dead, had the specific resilience of a being who had survived in hostile environments for a very long time. And the MK universe had well-established opinions about the permanence of death that complicated certainty on the subject. But he was down, and the vault was coming apart around them, the pocket dimension losing structural integrity as the soul collection that had been maintaining its metaphysical anchoring released into frequencies the dimension couldn't contain. "We need to leave," Liu Kang said. "Yeah," Wade agreed. He was on his feet, barely, and the soul magic damage leaving him at a level of functional that his healing factor was working hard to improve. But on his feet. He looked at the walls. The pulsing trapped light was moving differently now, not compressed, not contained, but dispersing, each pulse traveling outward into whatever came after. "Did it work?" Liu Kang asked. Wade listened. The voices below hearing were gone. The voices above it were fading. What remained was a silence that felt, for the first time in this vault, like actual silence rather than the absence of something that should have been present. "Yeah," he said. "It worked." The portal back opened because the dimension's destabilization had disrupted the portal's lock mechanism, which was either fortunate physics or narrative causality, and Wade had stopped distinguishing between the two several days ago. They went through. They came out on the tournament island in the gray pre-dawn light, the wrong-colored sky beginning its transition, the ocean below the cliff doing what it always did. Wade sat down heavily on the stone. The soul magic damage was healing, slowly, the healing factor working through a problem it had never encountered before, with the determined biological stubbornness that had kept Wade Wilson alive through everything. It would take time, more time than physical damage. He was fine with that. Liu Kang sat beside him without speaking, which was the correct response to the specific silence that follows an operation that worked, but cost something in the working. After a while, Wade said, "Shao Kahn's going to find out what we did." "Yes," Liu Kang said. "Quan Chi's going to be furious when he recovers." "Yes." "Raiden's going to want a full debrief and is probably going to be angry that we didn't include him." "Also yes." "And the tournament's still happening. Shang Tsung's still running his operation. And Outworld still wants to invade Earthrealm." Wade looked at the wrong-colored dawn. "We didn't fix the big thing." "No," Liu Kang said. "We fixed a thing." He paused. "Sometimes that is sufficient." Wade looked at him. In the Netherrealm's distant architecture, something that had been compressed and contained and stored against its will for a very long time was no longer there. And somewhere in that same architecture, moving through its specific torment with the burning, purposeful rage of a dead man who had been used as a weapon for decades by a sorcerer whose vault had just been destroyed, Scorpion felt something shift. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he felt it. Shao Kahn did not wait for the tournament to conclude. This was, technically, a violation of Elder God law. The framework that governed Mortal Kombat's dimensional politics was explicit on the subject of premature invasion. The 10-victory threshold existed as the structure through which conquest was legitimized, and the Elder God's enforcement of that structure was the only reason the tournament had any meaning at all. Shao Kahn knew this. He had always known this. He had spent decades working within the framework because the framework was useful, because a legitimate conquest carried political weight that a forced invasion didn't, because the Elder God's non-interference was conditional on his compliance, and their interference was something even he preferred to avoid. But Quan Chi's vault was gone. The soul collection that had represented decades of accumulated power, the infrastructure of the sorcerer's cross-dimensional operation, the leverage over Netherrealm politics that had given Shao Kahn's alliance with the Brotherhood of Shadow its teeth, all of it dispersed into frequencies that couldn't be recollected, released by an unkillable anomaly from a realm that wasn't supposed to exist and a Shaolin champion who should have been manageable, and had turned out to be considerably less manageable than projected. The Emperor of Outworld looked at the loss and made the calculation that conquerors make when patience stops being strategic and starts being weakness. He invaded anyway. The portals opened across Earthrealm simultaneously, not the single apertures of tournament logistics, but the full-dimensional assault of an empire that had done this 37 times and had refined the methodology to something close to art. They opened in cities, in wilderness, in the specific locations that Outworld's intelligence apparatus had identified as Earthrealm's structural vulnerabilities. Tarkatan warriors came through first, the advance force, followed by Outworld soldiers in the dark armor of Shao Kahn's standing army, followed by the sorceress support units that Shang Tsung had spent years preparing for exactly this contingency. The sky over the tournament island split open, and Raiden was already there when Wade and Liu Kang came running from the cliff's edge. The Thunder God standing in the courtyard with lightning crackling across his shoulders and an expression that contained several emotions simultaneously. Fury at the violation of Elder God law, the specific grief of a deity, watching something he'd spent millennia trying to prevent begin to happen. And underneath both of those, something that Wade recognized as the particular look of a person whose plan has encountered reality and is revising in real time. He moved early, Wade said. It wasn't a question. Because of what you did, Raiden said. And the accusation in it was genuine, but so was the acknowledgement underneath. The understanding that what they'd done to Quan Chi's vault had accelerated a timeline the Thunder God had always known was coming. The vault's destruction destabilized his alliance structure. He could no longer afford patience. So we made it worse. Wade said. You made it different, Liu Kang said quietly, from beside him. Different is not the same as worse. The first wave of Tarkatan warriors came through the island's portal before the sentence finished, and the courtyard became something else entirely. What followed was not a tournament fight. Tournament fights had structure. 2 combatants, sanctioned space, the Elder God's framework lending the violence a ritualized quality that made it something other than pure chaos. What followed was pure chaos. The specific variety that happens when an empire's invasion force encounters a small group of exceptional individuals in a confined space. And the confined space turns out to be less of an advantage for the larger force than simple mathematics suggested. Raiden handled the lightning side of things with the efficiency of a deity who had been waiting for the moment when the rules no longer constrained him. Liu Kang moved through the Tarkatan advance with the focused devastation of a Shaolin champion operating at absolute peak, every technique refined to the point where watching it was like watching something inevitable rather than chosen. Sonya Blade had appeared from somewhere with the Special Forces pragmatism of a soldier who understood that a portal invasion required immediate response before the numerical advantage became insurmountable. Johnny Cage was hitting people with a combination of genuine Hollywood stunt training and the specific desperate energy of a man who had come to this island expecting a career opportunity and was now fighting for his life and doing it with impressive competence. Wade was everywhere. Not that the soul magic damage from Quan Chi's extraction attempt had healed enough. Not completely. There was still a residue, a metaphysical bruising that his healing factor was working through with patient biological determination. But enough that he was functional, at a level that the Tarkatan advance found extremely difficult to account for. He hit the lines at the points of maximum pressure, not fighting cleanly, but fighting effectively. The katanas and the guns, and the specific mercenary knowledge of how battles move, and where the critical junctions are working together in the way they worked together when he stopped performing and started operating. He was hit many times. He kept getting back up. The invasion wave stalled on the tournament island in a way that Shao Kahn's 37 previous conquests had not prepared his commanders for. Not because Earthrealm's defenders were necessarily superior in raw power, but because the specific combination of Liu Kang's discipline and Raiden's divine authority and Sonya's tactical precision and Johnny's desperate competence and Wade's absolute biological refusal to stay down created a defensive coherence that ate through the advance with unsustainable attrition. And then Shao Kahn himself came through. The portal that opened for the Emperor was larger than the others. It had to be. He came through with the wrath hammer raised and the specific presence of a being who had decided that personal investment was required, that the anomaly had become significant enough to warrant direct engagement, that the geological patience had reached its natural terminus. The courtyard cleared around him the way spaces clear around absolute authority. Not because anyone retreated, but because everyone present recalibrated their spatial relationship to the new center of gravity. He looked at Wade. Wade looked at him. Behind the Emperor, through the portal, Outworld's bruise-colored sky was visible, and beneath it, the capital city. And somewhere in that city, the market district where people kept their eyes down and moved around the Tarkatans with the practiced spatial awareness of a population that had learned to survive under someone else's authority. Wade thought about Liu Kang's answer at the cliff's edge. Because the people in that market need someone too. Round 2, Wade said. You hit harder in your own environment. I'm going to need to know that up front. Shao Kahn said nothing. He swung the wrath hammer. Wade moved, not away, sideways, the blow passing through the space he'd occupied with enough force that the displaced air hit him like a physical impact. the hammer's passage leaving a line of cracked stone that hadn't been cracked before. He came back in from the angle, both katanas, was going for the joints of the armor and the way he'd cataloged in the throne room, looking for the gaps he'd identified when the Tarkatan guards had been the focus and Shao Kahn's bearing had been the data. The Emperor adjusted faster than expected. The second swing caught Wade across the chest and sent him across the courtyard in a way that was physically comprehensive. He hit the wall. He hit the ground. He bounced in a manner that suggested his skeleton had updated its opinion on several of its previous positions. The healing factor fired immediately, the biological emergency protocols running at maximum, and he was back on his feet in 10 seconds that felt considerably longer from the inside. Shao Kahn looked at him with something that was not quite respect and not quite frustration, but occupied the space between them. "You will not stop getting up," the Emperor said. It was not a question. It was a recalibration of the tactical picture. "No," Wade agreed, spitting something that the healing factor was already addressing. "I won't." "Then this achieves nothing." "It achieves the thing it's supposed to achieve," Wade said. He looked at Raiden, who was holding the portal anchors, the dimensional apertures through which the invasion was flowing, the sorcerous infrastructure that Shang Tsung's network maintained. Raiden had been building towards something during the fight, but the electrical charge around him escalating in the specific way that divine power escalates when a deity has found its moment. "It achieves keeping you here long enough." Shao Kahn turned to look at Raiden. The Thunder God released everything. The lightning that hit the portal anchors was not the combat lightning of Raiden's standard arsenal. It was the specific divine authority of a god-invoking elder god law, calling on the framework that governed dimensional conquest, the structure that said premature invasion was a violation, that the 10 victory threshold existed for reasons that predated Shao Kahn's empire and would outlast it. The portal anchors, struck with that authority, didn't simply close. They rejected the invasion's legitimacy. The dimensional apertures collapsed inward with a sound that was less explosion and more the universe asserting a grammatical correction. The Outworld forces on the island vanished, pulled back through collapsing portals, the invasion wave unmade by the Elder God framework reasserting itself. The bruise-colored sky visible through the Emperor's portal disappeared behind closing dimensional geometry. Shao Kahn stood in the courtyard with the portals gone and the invasion force gone, and the tournament island suddenly very quiet around him. And he looked at the specific situation he was in with the expression of a conqueror who had made a calculation and found the result. He was alone on Earthrealm soil, without his army, without his portal infrastructure, in a courtyard containing Raiden, Liu Kang, Sonya Blade, Johnny Cage, and Wade Wilson. The Elder Gods were watching. He had violated their framework. The consequences of that violation were beginning to manifest in the specific way that cosmic law manifests. Not dramatically, not with visible divine intervention, but with the cold administrative certainty of a framework reasserting itself against something that had exceeded its sanctioned limits. Shao Kahn looked at all of this. He looked at Wade specifically. For a long moment, the geological patience and the absolute authority and the 37 conquered realms all present in the look, and underneath all of that, the specific expression of a being who has encountered something it didn't fully account for and is filing it. "This is not finished," Shao Kahn said. "No," Wade agreed. "It really isn't." The Elder Gods took Shao Kahn. Not permanently, the MK universe had established opinions about permanence that were complicated, and Shao Kahn's specific resilience and political significance. meant that the consequences of his violation would be adjudicated through the Elder God Framework's processes rather than simple erasure. But he was gone from the courtyard, pulled into the specific accountability of cosmic law, and the Tournament Island was quiet in the way that places are quiet after something enormous has passed through them. Raiden stood in the courtyard center and looked at the space where the Emperor had been. The electrical charge around him had settled. He looked older than he had at the start of this, not physically. Deities didn't age that way. But in the way that beings look older when they've been carrying something heavy and have put it down and can feel the weight they were holding. Now he looked at Wade. "You held him," Raiden said. "Long enough for the invocation to complete." "That was the plan," Wade said. "You could have died. I was going to get back up. The soul magic damage. I was going to get back up," Wade said again, simply. Not bravado. Just the plain statement of a man who had examined the options and found only one that fit his particular moral architecture. Liu Kang stood beside Wade in the quiet aftermath and said nothing, which was the correct response. And the courtyard held all of them in the specific stillness of people who have been through something together and are taking a moment to be on the other side of it. Sonya Blade looked at Wade with the expression of a Special Forces officer who has updated a threat assessment to a different category. "You're either the luckiest person I've ever met," she said, "or the most stubborn." "Why not both?" Wade said. Johnny Cage pointed at him. "Ma, I want you to know that I had you at 60-40 survival odds, and I am genuinely pleased to have been wrong." 60-40, Wade repeated. "I'm insulted. That's generous." Somewhere on the island, in the preparation chambers beneath the tournament compound, Shang Tsung stood in a room that had just lost its most significant strategic asset, and looked at the changed landscape of his operation with the careful attention of a sorcerer who had survived 10,000 years by treating setbacks as data rather than conclusions. Quan Chi's network was gone. Shao Kahn was in Elder God custody. The invasion had failed. The anomaly was still standing. He began, with the patience of centuries, to think about what came next. Wade felt it. The narrative shift, the story's movement toward its new equilibrium, the specific quality of a conclusion that was also a beginning. His fourth wall awareness read it the way it read everything, with the combination of clarity and distance that came from knowing you were in a story while also being completely, genuinely present in it. He looked at the wrong-colored sky. He looked at the ocean. He thought about the market district in Outworld's capital and the people who kept their eyes down, and whether the Elder God's adjudication of Shao Kahn's violation would produce anything that helped them, or whether cosmic law, like most law, was primarily interested in its own framework rather than the people inside it. He thought about Scorpion. Somewhere on this island or somewhere in the Netherrealm's architecture, feeling the shift that the vault's destruction had caused, not knowing yet what it meant for the decades of manipulation that had governed his resurrection. He thought about Quan Chi recovering somewhere, filing the loss, beginning the next calculation. He thought about a chimichanga in Guadalajara that had tasted like carnitas and the concept of eternity. He sat down on the courtyard stone. Liu Kang sat beside him. "You could go back," the Shaolin champion said. "If the dimensional instability that brought you here could be reproduced, Raiden has resources, and the Elder God framework has been disturbed enough that the boundary between your universe and this one might be navigable." "Yeah," Wade said. "But?" Wade looked at the courtyard, at the scorch marks from Scorpion's hellfire, at the crack in the stone where Shao Kahn's hammer had passed, at the people standing in the aftermath of something they'd survived together. "Unfinished business," he said. Liu Kang nodded once, the small smile again, controlled and genuine. Must then you stay? Then I stay, Wade agreed. For now. He paused. Also, I need to find another chimichanga. The backup ones are gone and I'm an emotional eater. The multiverse does not forgive easily. It absorbs. It adjusts. It files the anomaly under new categories and updates its framework and continues operating. Because the multiverse is too large and too old to be permanently disrupted by any single intrusion, no matter how unprecedented. Quan Chi's vault was gone. Its contents released into frequencies that the Netherrealm's soul economy would take generations to recalibrate around. Shao Kahn was in Elder God custody, facing the specific accountability of a conqueror who had overplayed his hand against a framework older than his empire. The tournament island stood quieter than it had in 10,000 years of organized violence. The immediate crisis resolved into the particular exhausted stillness of aftermath. Wade Wilson remained. Not as a weapon, not as a resource, not as Raiden's piece on a cosmic board. As a presence, unpredictable, unkillable, she genuinely invested in the people in Outworld's market district who kept their eyes down in Scorpion's slow reckoning with decades of manipulated grief. In the unfinished architecture of a universe that had more wrong with it than one operation could address. He had consumed the Mortal Kombat universe the way the chimichanga had consumed him. Completely, chaotically, with total commitment and zero elegance. And the universe, for its part, had consumed something back, had left a mark that his healing factor couldn't touch and that he found, on examination, he didn't want it to. Shang Tsung was still out there, patient as centuries, building the next thing. The multiverse, it turned out, had excellent timing.